And just what in the hell is this supposed to be? The voice, sharp and laced with the unearned confidence of new authority, cut through the low murmur of the crowd. Lieutenant O'Connell, his uniform so crisp it looked like it could draw blood, stood with his hands on his hips, jaw tight. He was addressing an old man standing quietly near the roped-off VIP section for the ceremony. The old man didn't flinch. He was a stark contrast to the gleaming, high-tech world of the modern air base around them. He wore simple khaki trousers and a faded, brown leather jacket, its collar frayed and its cuffs worn smooth. In one gnarled hand, he held a pair of aged aviator sunglasses, and in the other, a simple, worn leather satchel that had seen better decades. His face was a road map of wrinkles, but his eyes, a pale and startling blue, were clear and sharp. They took in the young officer without a trace of fear or anger. "I asked you a question, old-timer." O'Connell pressed, his voice rising in volume, drawing the attention of a few nearby airmen and their families. He gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist at the old man's jacket. "Did you get that from a museum? This is a restricted area for the dedication of the F-35's new advanced avionics wing. This isn't a VFW hall for you to wander into and tell war stories." The old man's lips barely moved. "I have an invitation." His voice was a low, calm rumble, like stones shifting at the bottom of a river. It held a hint of a Midwestern drawl, softened by time. O'Connell scoffed, a theatrical sound meant for his audience. "An invitation? Let me see it." He held out a hand, expectant and impatient. The old man, with slow, deliberate movements, reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't produce a crisp, embossed cardstock invitation like the ones the other VIPs held. Instead, he brought out a simple, laminated ID card, yellowed with age. The photo was of a much younger man with the same piercing blue eyes, wearing an old-style flight suit. The card had no modern barcodes or security chips, just a typed name, Silas Crane, and a series of codes and clearances that were long since obsolete. O'Connell snatched the card. He squinted at it, a smirk playing on his lips. "Silas Crane? This thing expired before I was born, Grandpa. What is this, from the Korean War? The clearance codes aren't even in our system. This is a joke." He held the card between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a piece of trash. "It's still valid," Silas said, his voice remaining impossibly steady. "No, it's not." O'Connell snapped, his patience gone. He was an officer in charge of security for this high-profile event, and this relic was making him look foolish. "I don't have time for this. You need to leave the event area. Now, go on, before I have you escorted out." A young airman first class, Airman Miller, watched from a few yards away. He was supposed to be directing traffic to the parking lots, but the confrontation had caught his attention. There was something deeply unsettling about the scene. It wasn't just the lieutenant's arrogance, which was common enough among junior officers drunk on their new bars. It was the old man's profound calm. He stood there like an ancient oak tree in a windstorm, unmoving, his dignity an invisible shield against the lieutenant's verbal assault. O'Connell, seeing he wasn't getting the reaction he wanted, escalated. He stepped closer, invading the old man's personal space. "Look, Pops, I get it. You served. We all appreciate that. But your time is over. This is the modern Air Force. We have fifth-generation fighters, network-centric warfare, and security protocols you wouldn't understand. We don't use junk like whatever is on this ID." He tapped the laminated card against Silas's chest. "So for the last time, move along." The touch, slight as it was, seemed to break a spell. Silas blinked, and for a fleeting moment, the polished tarmac of Edwards Air Force Base dissolved around him. The hot California sun vanished, replaced by an oppressive, freezing darkness. The memory was sharp, visceral. He was 25 again, crammed into the coffin-tight cockpit of an aircraft that officially didn't exist. The only light was the faint, eerie green glow of the instruments. Outside, there was nothing but the blackness of 80,000 feet and the curve of the earth below. His gloved hands, young and strong then, moved with practiced economy over the controls. A red light blinked on his panel. A surface-to-air missile sight had just painted him. They had a lock. Standard procedure was to break off, to run. But down below, under the cover of a brewing storm, a team of Green Berets was about to be overrun, their position compromised. The intelligence he was gathering in that single pass, The location of enemy reserves was their only chance. He didn't break off. He pushed the throttle forward, threading a needle between mountain peaks he could only see on his radar, the missile warnings screaming in his headset. He felt the phantom heat of the explosion as the missile detonated a mile behind him, fooled by his countermeasures. He got the photos. The team on the ground got out alive. He landed with his fuel tanks reading empty, his body drenched in a cold sweat. No one ever knew. There was no medal, no report. The mission, the plane, the pilot, they were ghosts. His call sign was Ghost. "Hey, are you listening to me?" O'Connell's sharp voice pulled him back to the present. The memory vanished, leaving an echo of cold and adrenaline. Silas looked at the lieutenant, his pale blue eyes seeming to see right through the young man's polished bravado to the insecurity beneath. "I hear you, son." The condescending term of endearment was the final straw for O'Connell. "That's it. You're being removed." He reached out and grabbed Silas's arm, his grip firm. "You are now trespassing on a federal installation." That was when Airman Miller decided he had seen enough. This wasn't right. He didn't know who the old man was, but he knew disrespect when he saw it. An officer putting his hands on an old veteran, a civilian, was a line you didn't cross. Miller discreetly pulled out his phone. He had the number for the command post, a direct line to the senior enlisted advisor, Master Sergeant Reyes, a man known for his no-nonsense attitude and fierce loyalty to the Air Force's core values. He spoke quickly and quietly into the phone. "Master Sergeant Reyes, this is Airman Miller out at the flight line dedication. Sir, I'm sorry to bother you, but we have a situation. Lieutenant O'Connell he's trying to physically remove an elderly veteran from the ceremony. The man seems calm, he's not causing any trouble, but the lieutenant is being very aggressive. I don't know, sir, something just feels wrong about it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Master Sergeant Reyes's voice came back, tight with concern. "Describe the veteran, Miller." "Elderly, sir. Maybe 80. Wears an old leather flight jacket." He showed the LT an old laminated ID. The name was Silas Crane, I think. The silence on the other end of the line was suddenly heavy, absolute. For a moment, Miller thought the call had dropped. Then Reyes spoke, his voice a strained whisper. "Silas Crane? Miller, are you absolutely certain?" "Yes, Master Sergeant. That's the name I heard." "Son, do not let that man leave your sight," Reyes commanded, his voice now filled with an urgency that bordered on panic. "Stall them. Do whatever you have to do. I am making a call. Stay on the line." Miller could hear frantic, muffled talking in the background. Back on the tarmac, O'Connell was trying to pull Silas towards the perimeter fence. But the old man, for all his age, was surprisingly anchored. He wasn't resisting, merely existing, his weight seeming to root him to the spot. "Let's go, Grandpa," O'Connell grunted, his face turning red with effort and embarrassment. The small crowd was growing larger, their phones now out, recording the undignified spectacle. Suddenly, a new sound sliced through the air, completely overwhelming the ceremony's string quartet. It was the rhythmic, powerful thumping of rotor blades, growing louder at an alarming rate. Heads turned and pointed towards the sky. A UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, painted in the colors of the base command, was descending rapidly, not towards the main helipad, but towards an emergency clearing just 100 yards from the confrontation. It was an unscheduled, aggressive landing that screamed emergency. The helicopter touched down in a whirlwind of dust and dried grass. The side door slid open before the rotors had even begun to slow, and a figure emerged, ducking under the blades. He was tall and imposing, his uniform adorned with the 2 silver stars of a major general. It was General Vance, the base commander himself. His face was a thundercloud of fury. He strode across the tarmac with a purpose that parted the crowd like the Red Sea. He didn't look at the $500 million fighter jet being dedicated. He didn't look at the assembled dignitaries. His eyes were locked on the scene with the young lieutenant and the old man. Lieutenant O'Connell froze, his hand still clamped on Silas's arm. His face went pale. The base commander's unscheduled, dramatic arrival could only mean one thing. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. He instinctively dropped his hand from Silas's jacket and tried to straighten his uniform, a pathetic gesture of deference. General Vance didn't even glance at him. He marched straight past the stammering lieutenant and came to a dead stop directly in front of Silas Crane. The two-star general, a man who commanded thousands of personnel and billions of dollars in assets, a man who regularly briefed the Pentagon, stood ramrod straight. Then, in a motion so sharp and precise it seemed to cut the air, he raised his hand to his brow and delivered the most perfect, reverent salute of his entire career. The crowd gasped. A collective, audible shock rippled through the onlookers. A major general was saluting a civilian in a tattered old jacket. Lieutenant O'Connell's jaw hung open, his mind utterly unable to process what he was seeing. Silas, with a quiet dignity, simply nodded. It was a gesture of acknowledgement between equals. General Vance held the salute for a long, pregnant moment before crisply lowering his hand. Only then did he turn his head, his eyes fixing on Lieutenant O'Connell. The fury in them was cold, immense, and terrifying. "Lieutenant," General Vance's voice was dangerously quiet, yet it carried across the now silent tarmac. "Do you have any idea at all, who you just assaulted?" O'Connell stammered, his words failing him. "Sir, General, sir, this man, he had no valid ID. He was in a restricted area. I was just following protocol, sir." "Protocol?" Vance's voice was laced with ice. "You were following your own arrogant, blind ignorance, is what you were doing. You see this man?" He gestured to Silas. "You see this old-timer in his museum piece jacket? You stand here on the grounds of a base dedicated to pushing the boundaries of flight, and you have no idea you are standing in the presence of the man who drew the goddamn map." He took a step towards O'Connell, who visibly shrank back. "This man is Silas Crane, but for 30 years, the most powerful people in the world knew him by another name, Ghost. While your father was still in diapers, this man was flying solo reconnaissance missions over hostile territory in aircraft that we will deny ever existed until the end of time. He flew higher and faster than any human being had a right to. He did it without backup, without a rescue plan, and with the full knowledge that if he were ever captured, his country would disavow him completely." The general's voice rose, resonating with a righteous anger that held every person captive. "You see this jacket? This isn't a costume. This is the jacket he was wearing when he single-handedly gathered the photo intelligence that prevented the 1973 war from going nuclear. The worn leather on that cuff is from his hand gripping the stick for 18 straight hours to map the entire Soviet missile defense grid. Those scuffs on the elbow? That's from being dragged from the wreckage of his experimental aircraft after it malfunctioned at Mach 3 over the Arctic Circle. He walked for 2 weeks to get to a friendly outpost, surviving on little more than grit and the secrets he carried in his head." He pointed a trembling finger at the young lieutenant. "You demanded to see his ID. His ID is written in the history of every major conflict of the Cold War. It's in the declassified files that are still 75% blacked out with marker. He holds flight records that will never be broken because we don't build aircraft like that anymore, and we don't build men like him. He has been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, 3 Silver Stars, and a Presidential Medal of Freedom, all of them in secret. He was offered a General's Star a dozen times and turned it down every time because he said he belonged in a cockpit, not behind a desk." The general paused, taking a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the stunned crowd before landing back on the utterly broken lieutenant. "This ceremony today, dedicating this new avionics wing for the F-35, is happening because of data his missions provided 30 years ago. He is the guest of honor. His expired ID card is one of only 4 in existence. It's a lifetime, all-access pass to any military installation on this planet, personally signed by a former director of the CIA. It doesn't scan in your system because it's not for your system. It's for people who know what real service looks like. You, Lieutenant, with your polished boots and your by-the-book arrogance, are not worthy to breathe the same air as this man, let alone touch him." Silence. The only sound was the wind whistling faintly across the flight line. Lieutenant O'Connell stood, his face ashen, his entire world, his career, his self-image, shattered in the space of 2 minutes. General Vance turned back to Silas, his expression softening instantly. "Sir, I am profoundly sorry. My car is waiting. Please, allow me to escort you to your seat at the front." But Silas raised a hand, his gnarled fingers gently touching the general's forearm. He looked past the general to the disgraced lieutenant, who was staring at the ground, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "He's just a boy, Frank," Silas said, his voice soft and devoid of any malice. He used the general's first name with an easy familiarity. "He's young, eager to do his duty. He just needs to learn that what's on the inside of a person is more important than the uniform they wear on the outside. Don't ruin his career over this. Teach him." The grace of the gesture was more powerful than any punishment. O'Connell looked up, his eyes swimming with tears of shame and a dawning, crushing sense of respect. He saw not an old relic, but a legend who had just offered him unearned forgiveness. General Vance stared at Silas for a long moment, then nodded slowly, his own eyes glistening. "As you wish, sir." He then fixed O'Connell with one last, hard look. "You will report to my office at 1600 hours. You and I are going to have a very long talk about respect. And then you're going to spend the next month in the base archives, reading every declassified file that has this man's name on it. Maybe then you'll understand." "Yes, sir," O'Connell whispered, his voice cracking. General Vance personally walked Silas to the front row, seating him next to a visiting senator who immediately looked confused, then intrigued. The story of what had just happened would spread through the Air Force like wildfire, becoming a new kind of legend. It would be a lesson taught for years to come at officer training schools, a reminder that the greatest heroes are often the ones who seek no glory, and that true authority is not in rank, but in character. The real strength of the armed forces isn't in its gleaming new technology, but in the quiet, unbreakable spirit of service passed down by giants like Silas Crane. And for anyone who hears this story, it's a powerful lesson that true greatness doesn't always advertise, so it's wise to treat everyone with dignity. If tales of quiet heroism and earned respect resonate with you, consider following for more stories just like this one.